And so again, myself, my name is Eric Anderchuk. I'm the Director of Grants and Development at the Flint and Genesee Group. I've been with the organization for a little over 5 years now, and have been working specifically in grant writing for economic development, and have had a lot of experience writing in that area and some of the education as well. I'm going to hand it off to my teammate, Sharima Bauer, to introduce herself.
Thank you very much, Eric. Yes, hello everyone, and it's great to be here with you today on this gorgeous, gorgeous morning. My name is Sharima Bauer, and I have been on the grants team for the Flint and Genesee Group since August of 2019. And if you've ever heard of Youth Quest or Teen Quest or the Summer Youth Initiative, I am the grant specialist for our out of school time programs, all of which those are, and I write the grants for those programs. And so Youth Quest is based in the Flint Community Schools and the International Academy of Flint. Teen Quest is based in all high schools of the school districts of GISD, and the Summer Youth Initiative is a summer youth employment program that employs Teen Quest graduates. And so it's my pleasure to be able to share a little bit of my knowledge with you today in Grants 201.
Thanks, Sharima. Our other teammate, Allison Newman, is also on the line. I'll let her introduce herself as well.
Thanks, Eric. Hello, everyone. As Eric mentioned, my name is Allison Newman. I have been with the Chamber for, I think it's about 7 months now, so since November of last year. And I come from kind of a news background, so the transition's kind of interesting, but also pretty easy. There's a lot of kind of crossover in how you do grant writing and how you look at news writing and things like that. I work specifically in the economic development portion of our grant writing team, and I look forward to hopefully getting to know some of you today and sharing some of our knowledge.
Thanks, Allison. And then lastly, we have James Michael Laney on the team, and I'll let him introduce himself.
Morning, everyone. Yes, my name is James Michael, as Eric mentioned. I am the research and data analyst for our Flint and Genesee Group, located in our grants development team. So a lot of what I do is help our grant funded programs with their evaluations, make sure that their data is together so that we can report it out to our funders and other stakeholders, and just offer general advice when it comes to research and data and the like.
Thanks, James. All right, so that's our team. We're gonna split off and have each one of us do different sections of the presentation. So you'll be hearing from each one of us today. So that's good to see. If you go to the next slide, please. Now is the opportunity for everyone on the team or on the call today to let us know how Grants 101 went. What was some of your biggest takeaways, or what was one of the biggest pieces of information you took away from the last course? And so anyone from that can go ahead and just speak up and let us know what you thought Grants 101 really did a good job of helping you with. Anyone want to volunteer? All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and move on, since people aren't volunteering right off the bat. Maybe it's early morning and some of you are still sipping on your coffee, but throughout the course, if you have any questions, please go ahead, raise your hand in the chat box or ask the question in the chat room, and we'll get to those. Also,
I'd like to say,
go ahead.
This is Geraldine. I can say about 101. One of the things that I took away from it is to make sure that when you're applying for a grant, that you know what you're applying for falls up under the category. Because sometimes people apply for stuff that's not even in the grant.
Exactly. One of the biggest things that people struggle with is researching the funders that are out there and making sure that they know exactly what they're applying to, what kind of programs that the funder is looking to fund, and making sure that you know that there's a direct connection so that you can be as successful as you can be right off the bat. Great tip. Anyone else have any other thoughts from Grants 101 that they took away? All right, well, let's go on to the next slide, and I'm going to hand this off to Allison to start us off this morning, and she's going to go over grant reporting and management. Grants 101 really kind of left off with, we've done all the research, we've started the writing process, we know what the document should look like. Now Grants 201 starts, and we kind of have been awarded the grant, so now what do you do? So Allison's going to start us off with that process. So go ahead, Allison.
Thanks, Eric. So yeah, we're going to start you right off in the kind of reporting and management aspect of grants. So like Eric mentioned, you've been awarded this grant. Now what do you do and what should you expect? So the biggest thing that is going to come out of it is some agreements and contracts. And these are just going to be documents that basically it's the terms and conditions that, you know, everyone usually doesn't read, but in this case, you really need to before you agree to it. So it's going to have a lot of that legal jargon and the expectations for you as the grantee, as well as some expectations from your funder. So it's going to right off the bat state how much your award amount is. And, you know, just because you applied for an award amount doesn't mean you're going to get that full amount. There are chances and situations sometimes where the funder's like, well, actually, maybe I want to give you half of your award amount and we'll see where it goes. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. You were still funded some money. You can still do some projects with that. So don't be disappointed if that were to ever happen. It's also going to kind of lay out your grant period and the time frame. And what I mean by that is the length of your grant. Commonly, you're looking at years, whether it be 1 or 2. It's not always the case, but that's just what I have seen a lot lately. And that's going to tell you when you are expected to receive the funding from your funder, when you're expected to start your project or your research or whatever you're doing for your proposal. It's also going to include when or if some reports are due. More often than not, you are going to have a final report, and sometimes you're also going to have bi-weekly or interim halfway through reports, and those are just going to be situations where you're kind of reporting on your progress. You're going to let your funder know, hey, this is what's going on, this is what we've accomplished so far, here's what we're going to do next. So it's really just kind of keeping in touch with your funder and your program officer. So you're going to, in that grant agreement and contract, you are going to know who's going to be your point of contact person from your funder, as well as letting them know who you are nominating, if you will, as your point of contact person. So that way those two people are keeping up constant communication and everyone is on the same page. And that's who you are going to be sending your reports to, or who, you know, you can ask any questions, or if something were to happen and you needed an extension, whatever it may be, those are going to be the people who are communicating. I mentioned already payment schedule, and it's not all cut and dry. Sometimes with payment schedules, you could get all of that money up front. It could be, hey, here's your funding, go do your project. It could be a, hey, we're going to give you half of the funding now, as kind of, you know, get you jump started, and then you're going to complete your project and we'll give you the other half. Or you could be in a situation where your funder asks you to kind of complete and put that money up front yourself and complete that, complete that project, and then they'll reimburse you at the end. So those kinds of terms and agreements are going to be laid out in that contract. You are also going to be speaking on funds. There are going to be kind of rules on how you can use them and what happens if, say, you don't use them all, which does happen from time to time. And especially during COVID, there are things that, you know, kind of might get in the way of you doing some stuff. Last year, a lot of people really wanted to build some things. You may have heard people trying to do additions to their houses, but lumber and getting employees to come help was so difficult. So in terms of a grant, if that were to ever happen, you know, it's keeping in communication with your funder and keeping on top of how things are going with your project. And that could be a situation where maybe you have to return the unused funds by the end of the grant period because you weren't able to use it all. And that's all right. That's just going to be something you have to agree upon. It could also be a situation where they let you extend your grant period due to certain circumstances. So like I've mentioned, and I will mention several times, keeping communication with your funder is very important. It's also going to, in this contract and agreements, that's going to lay out the deliverables. And these are just the things that you have promised that you are going to do. And the things, they're going to be the things that you say you are going to report on. And they are going to be the items of this project that really prove that what you are doing or what you did or what you started are making an impact. And basically, you know, you have laid out this proposal that has a goal in mind, and it's just, were you able to accomplish that goal? Were you able to at least start that goal? Were you not able to? Those are going to be the kind of things you need to look at when you're looking at what is expected of you. And then moving on, we are going to look at, so you have received those funds. Oh, Bree, you can go back to the last slide, sorry. You're going to want to look at if there is a call for acknowledgement letters or receipt of funds. So obviously you've received these funds, you've signed some contracts and send them back. And it's never a bad thing to send a document to your funder saying, within 48 hours of receiving those funds, saying, yes, I've received those funds for this project, for this timeline. It's just, think of it as like a courtesy. And it's just acknowledging, this is what I've received and this is what I plan on doing it with it. You might also, in those agreements, site visits might be mentioned, and that might sound a little funny, but we'll explain. So some funding organizations look at it as, hey, I know you're sending me reports, but I want to see it for myself. So in our Grants 101, we had someone, and I don't know if she's here today, but she was speaking about her program for equine therapy. And this is a great example. So what a site visit for that might look like is someone from your funding organization, potentially your program officer, coming out to the actual site and viewing the project going on live in person. So that could be coming to, I'm assuming, what would be the barn, looking at the horses, looking at potentially the program that going on at the time, maybe even speaking to some people participating in it, just really immersing themselves in the reporting process. And you could also take it to a more formal standpoint where you agree upon meeting in a meeting situation, whether it be, you know, grab coffee, meet in the office, something along those lines, and really talk specifics and do that kind of reporting process in person. So you could have a formal and an informal site visit. During COVID, some of these site visits might be done over Zoom. So there's really a lot of different options there, and your funder will lay out what their expectations are for that. It is always best to, if you are having a site visit, no matter what format, to kind of prepare yourself ahead of time. And what I mean by that is think of things you will be asked about. So, you know, how is the project going? How many people are participating? Or how much have you gotten done so far? Or what are you planning to do in the next 2 weeks? So just really think ahead and think on, maybe you had an event happen and it was awesome and you had a lot of really great feedback. You could share that experience as well. So there's really a lot of different opportunities in how you can utilize site visits and what kind of information can be shared during them. So I mentioned a little bit earlier about interim and final reporting, and I'm going to go a little bit more in depth on that. So in your grant agreement and even in your proposal, you said what you were going to report on and what your expectations were. And obviously your proposal is an idea on how to get to that goal. And so you're going to be measuring a lot of different things potentially. So you're going to want to talk about those things in your interim, and if you have an interim, and your final report. So these are just going to be opportunities for you to share with your funder, you know, this is what's going on. This is how well we're doing so far. This is what we're doing next. My best advice for you guys is to start early on those. And I know it might sound like, oh, if it's just a halfway project or a halfway report through the project, we might not have enough done. I don't need to start talking about that until, you know, I don't need to start putting that together until 2 days before. that's not going to be enough time. You're going to want to do some good research into your own project and say, hey, this is, how far I've done. Maybe add some statistics. If you did have that one event, but you have another one coming forward or happening in the future, look at what your attendance was for that first one and maybe share that with your funder. That's important information. So you know that it is having a positive effect and it's impacting people. So now I'm going to talk about some kind of tools and software options you might have for grant management. And think of it this way. One grant might sound pretty easy to manage, but once you start getting into 2, 3, 50, things are going to get a little bit more confusing. And, speaking from my own experience, last year, we worked with a couple of grants that had very similar names, and that was so confusing. And if we didn't have different operating software to kind of organize that, I might have been lost. Now, I will say you don't need software in order to keep things manageable. You have a lot of different options here. So you could use Google Spreadsheets, you could use Excel, you could use a lot of different kinds of things. The best opportunity here, I guess, if you wanted to create an easy spreadsheet that's not going to cause a lot of work, use Google Spreadsheets, put the grant name, when you are supposed to be awarded it, if you were awarded it, how much it was for, when your reports are due. There you go. You've got some information down. You at least have that organized and you have your timeline laid out. And you could create that for several different projects at one time and several different grants at one time. If you had wanted to, you could potentially invest more into, Microsoft and utilize email and calendar programs. If maybe a spreadsheet's not your thing, create calendar options and calendar events. This is when my interim reports due. Remind me in 5 days, or remind me 5 days beforehand, I should start working on this. There's really a lot of different options. If you did want to get into actual grant management software, there are couple out there. Well, there's several out there, such as Grant Hub, Flux, WiseHive, and there are a bunch of different demos for you to try them out if you wanted to go that far. Some of those demos are going to be free, but a lot of the software you do have to pay for. So that's really just up to you how far into the organization of your own projects do you want to go. And like I said, you don't have to get software if you don't want to. It just offers some extra things that maybe you don't need yet, but if you did want to look at some of these software options, they offer things like peer collaboration. You could have the opportunity to actually seek grants from these programs. And what I mean by that is some of them do offer kind of search functions where you can look for other grants out there similar to what you have been applying for, as well as document management. You can upload your documents on there, and then if you log in, you know exactly what you did for this grant, what was turned in, when, was it awarded, was it not? That's something really important to mention. Keep track of the ones you weren't awarded. Just because you weren't awarded it, doesn't mean, that's a huge failure. It could be a situation where you keep tabs on it, see if it comes around again next year or again in 6 months, and you can look at how to build upon that. What was the project I proposed previously? How much did I ask for? Did I get any feedback from the funder on why it wasn't funded? And you can utilize those kind of elements to potentially apply for it again in the future. So you have had experience applying for that before, and you know what the expectations were before. So you know kind of what to expect coming this next time around. Another kind of fun thing you can look at with some of these grant software opportunities is actually full out reports on, how much. One of the ones we use offers you the opportunity to look at how much funding you've been awarded from one specific funder throughout the whole year or throughout whatever time frame you're looking at. And that is just kind of nice information to know where your funding, if you are doing multiple grants or utilizing multiple grants, where most of your funding is coming from and who it's coming from, and potentially opportunities for, hey, maybe I don't utilize this funder as often, maybe I should look to see if this funder has other opportunities out there so I could utilize them as well. Okay, so now I'm going to move into the grant collection and analysis. So the next slide, Bree. Thank you. Okay, so when you're doing your data collection and analysis things, there are a couple of really important things to look at, and honestly, the biggest one being privacy. So when you are collecting data, you need to really think about how you are collecting it, who you're collecting it from, and do you need specific permission? So when, and usually always, if possible, you should request permission to collect and distribute data from participants and inform them what you are using their data for. So a great way to think about this is if you are reporting on, so in Grants 101, we use the example of a park for a lot of our different examples. So in terms of the park, let's say you wanted to upgrade the park equipment out there, so the little jungle gyms or whatnot. So something you might want to do is go door to door and asking people in the neighborhood, hey, what do you think about these updates I want to do? Do you think this would be useful, or do you not think it would be useful? So that's a little bit of data collection. But when you're doing that, you should really tell these people, this is what I would like to do. Can I use your information that you are telling me right now to facilitate this program or to justify why I want to do this? So it's really just keeping in communication with people. Legally speaking, you also need to keep aware of, specific privacy laws in terms of HIPAA, which is related to health, FERPA, which is related to education, as well as personal information with financial institutions and government entities. There are some times when you may be gathering specific information that you genuinely cannot share with other people, and you need to, you'll probably have to sign some form of data agreements or something like that, that just really lay out what kind of information you can share, how you're going to share it, and where you're even getting it from and how you're getting it. So really just doing your own research and touching on every single base, making sure that what you are doing is protecting people's privacy as well as protecting yourself. So the rule of thumb on that is typically don't report on specific individuals, but on groupings. And that kind of comes together when you're putting all of your data together. You will be probably sharing group data rather than individual data. So speaking on data, you may want to kind of look at the difference between qualitative and quantitative. And there are several different ways you can look at that. The best rule of thumb that I like to use is kind of look at qualitative as the quality. So you're looking at quality data. This is going to be something that kind of answers the how or the why. And that's going to be data that maybe you get from a smaller sample size, maybe you get from interviewing people. It's going to be kind of the feeling or, appearances and data kind of like that. It's going to be things that can't be counted. Whereas with quantitative data, that's going to be where you kind of get more into numbers and, maybe you are looking at how many people in this area visit this park. And you're going to check the 4x4 block radius. Theoretically, you'll know how many residents live there. If all of those residents were to answer your question on, do you utilize this park? You could look at that number there, or how many people in that neighborhood wanted to see improvements to that park. That's going to be some quantitative research. If you were to ask them, what kind of improvements do you want to see made? That's going to be more of your qualitative kind of suggestions. So it's just the difference between numbers and feelings, suggestions, those kinds of things. So when thinking about how you are going to, when thinking about how to do your data collection, because there's really no preferred way on whether or not you want to do qualitative or quantitative. It's up to you. It's what you think fits best with your program. And sometimes a blend of both could be the most useful. So how are you going to gather that data? use what you got right off the bat, because you might not even know that you actually have that data available to you right away. And what I mean by that, so jumping back to our equine therapy example that I had used, if there's a sign-in sheet, you've got names of people right there. You have how many people attended your event. That right there is a number you could use. And say you did 3 events in a row and you had improved on those events, you could look at that attendance and see if there were any changes. And that could be a direct correlation to whatever project you're doing, to really prove, you're making an impact. You could look at registration info. So where do your participants in your program, where are they coming from? Who is the audience that you have been targeting? Is it successful based off of where your attendees are coming from? As well as some contact information in regards to maybe sending out surveys or things like that. You also have potential access to subscription data services. And there are a lot of different kind of ways you can utilize those. Libraries are a great source to find those. A lot of libraries pay for large subscription data services. And if you have a library card, you can use that for free. So you're going to have access to scholarly journals, articles, some demographic data, even local genealogy and history, which are some really cool things you could potentially use for your programs. Don't knock history. It is definitely helpful in grant proposals, as well as looking at maybe small business resources. We have some websites coming up that we'll be able to share with you in just a moment. So an example of a paid data subscription service, includes EMSI. You could look at mel.org. And there are pros and cons to both of them, or to all subscription services, really. So some of the pros being you have prepackaged reports and graphs and charts, maybe with some analysis that's just readily available for you. But with that, in these paid subscription services, some of them use algorithms, and I'm not going to get too deep into what that means, but with those algorithms, sometimes they have additional data that may not necessarily affect you or have any impact on your grant report, or your grant in general. So the best way to kind of combat any confusing data is just Google it, double check it yourself from another source and make sure, yeah, that data is correct. And yeah, it's being used for the purpose I am searching for. So that's not to say don't use subscription services, definitely utilize them. Just, tread cautiously and don't assume everything you read is going to be correct. Just double check it. So you may also have a situation where you are Googling some data just to see whatever you might be looking for. Does this kind of program already exist? Where does it exist, kind of thing? And you would be surprised how often you can get, well, maybe you wouldn't be surprised, but a lot of the data that you might be looking for could be available to you through online newspapers or web articles from radio stations and TV stations. They are expected to report on factually correct data. And a lot of times the way that news stories are written are to share easily digestible data. They're written that way so you can understand it and you can utilize that data to support your findings or support what you are trying to accomplish. And they're a lot of times archived for a long time, so you could get some historical as in like maybe 5 years back information, not always, but sometimes. So definitely don't knock your local news. They're going to be there as an important resource. And 3, I think you can click to the next slide. So these are going to be some of our other suggested data sources. So the US Census Bureau, they collect a lot of different kinds of data based off of all different regions. So you can really utilize that for a lot of different options. The CDC, same thing. Those are going to be national kind of places for you to look for information, but you can kind of narrow them down a little bit. Genesee County Health Department would be a great way to narrow down some of that information you're looking for in terms of countywide health. you could utilize Michigan's DTMB, which is information on the Michigan Bureau of Labor Market and strategic initiatives. You can look at all the way down to current city level data for a lot of Michigan that might not easily be found elsewhere. So that's a great resource. Ruth Mott Foundation specifically operates and does their research and their work focused in North Flint. So if you are looking to do something in North Flint, Ruth Mott might have a great resource for you to gather some information from, as well as you could look at Michigan school data. Map Flint is another one that's going to be kind of Flint specific. That is a mapping program that visualizes your community data, which also has detailed demographics for each Flint ward. And that visualized community data can actually be really cool. I think we talked about this in 101, but if not, just in case, something that could kind of help your proposals is actually screenshots of data and create your own graphs and things like that. So those could be really useful in both your proposals and your reporting to provide those visual representations of what you're kind of trying to target and demographics and things like that. And like we mentioned, newspapers are another great option. And in addition to kind of libraries, you could look at universities and colleges. A lot of them do scholarly research themselves and have that out there for you to utilize as well. So U of M Flint would be a great option. I'm sure Mott has great options. There's really ultimately what I mean by this is there's a lot of different data sources for you to utilize, and just start researching yourself. You would be amazed what you could find and how you can find it and what's available out there. Okay, so we can move on to more elements of data collection and analysis. So with data analysis, and I touched on this a little bit earlier, with collecting your data, you might run into a situation where the person you are asking, maybe it would be like an organization or a company, they have a specific data agreement, and what that you would have to sign and agree to. And what that basically means is it is an agreement between the two organizations of what data you're collecting, what you're using it for, and what is okay for you to share out. Because a lot of times, say if you were working with schools, you might want to look at students' school grades. Well, how exactly can you share those school grades in a confidential manner? So you're not going to want to share, Susie Joe's exact grade point average and her report card for semester 1, but maybe you want to look at the entire 8th grade and say this was the average school grade, and how our programs may have helped XYZ. So it's really just keeping tabs on how you're collecting the data. Yes, James Michael.
I would also like to add that the data agreements also help ensure that you get the data that you need as well. Yes. So that in the end, if you are expecting to receive some critical data from like a vendor or a partner that is required for your funding that you can't get on your own, then it's helpful to have an agreement set up with whoever you're working with to make sure that that information is captured.
Yes, thank you so much. I appreciate that addition. So really these data agreements offer a lot. It's really an accountability agreement for both you and your data source. And it'll also give you information like some of these data sources utilize secure servers, and that agreement will allow you to access that secure server. And, as we've mentioned, it will just really lay out what you can and how you can or can't utilize that information or potentially share it out. So another very popular aspect of data collection, and one that I enjoy a lot, is surveys. And there are a lot of different ways that you can utilize surveys to provide data. So one of the things you might want to think about is how you are even going to get surveys out to people. And obviously you could have someone print out surveys and hand them out in the park situation, in that 4x4 block of park area residents, say, that you are looking to get data from. Maybe you want to have someone go out and give them a survey on paper, and then you'll come back in a week and collect them if they chose to respond. And while that is kind of labor intensive and you're going to have someone available to review those survey data responses, that could be useful. There is also the opportunity for you to utilize survey services such as like SurveyMonkey, or I believe Google has one that I'm not remembering the name of right at the moment, but SurveyMonkey is a very popular electronic survey option that could be sent out through email, or even, there are opportunities for you to just say you have a social media page. You could put I'm going to use SurveyMonkey as an example here. So you could put your SurveyMonkey out there and have it pinned on your Facebook page, say, for a week, and just invite people in your area to respond to your survey. And that's kind of an easy, maybe a little bit lower effort on you. I don't like saying effort, but time use. Oh, thank you for those suggestions, James Michael. Really just think about how much time you have to read these responses, provide the surveys themselves to begin with, but then also utilize and do the data collection from those surveys. So when you are creating surveys, if that's the route you're going to choose to go, you need to think about what are going to be some good survey questions. And there are several different options on how to set up a survey question. Generally speaking, you're going to want to ask close-ended questions. And what I mean by that is they're going to be answers or you're going to be looking for answers that are either yes or no, or maybe it's on a scale of really liked to really dislike. It's pretty easy. It's going to have a definitive response. That being said, you can ask a couple open-ended questions. We don't really recommend more than 2. But you could ask those at the end of your survey, and that could be, again, in this PARC response, how did you feel about this event that happened? Or how do you think, what do you think we could add to this park to make it more enjoyable, or to bring more people to the park? Or say maybe this specific park really gets utilized in summer, but not so much in spring and fall. What could we add to encourage people to utilize this in our maybe less popular months? So they're going to be questions that maybe ask for a little more thought process from your respondents, but they're still fairly easy to ask and to answer. And you could utilize them potentially in your proposal, or you could utilize them in your reporting and project planning. So you're going to want to ask kind of neutral questions also when you are writing those things. So if, say, we're using this park, don't write a question that's going to be like, we already know that this park is really awesome. How awesome do you think it is? Well, you've already kind of guided the answer on that, and you're not really allowing for answers of maybe, I don't like this park that much. So really don't use kind of those qualifier, or not qualifier words, but those words like awesome, or really great, or things like that, really bad even. Let your respondent use those words so they can add the feeling to it. You are remaining neutral, your questions remaining neutral. You're not guiding their response into something you might want without even realizing it. Sometimes you might not realize that the way you're writing it is that way. So if you have the opportunity to have someone read it ahead of time, do it. That would be great, helpful. Speaking on that, if you were to ask someone's opinion on a scale of, like I had mentioned, strongly disagree to disagree, neutral, agree, strongly agree, that's going to be a balanced answer choice. So you have given your respondent opportunity to answer any of the options, really. So, if they strongly disagreed with improvements you wanted to make, they can mark that. If they strongly agree with it, they can mark that. If they don't really care, they can mark that. That's going to allow for you to really get truly factual data and really utilize the opinions of the people in that neighborhood. Another thing to consider if you are writing either closed-ended or open-ended questions, don't ask more than one thing in one question. And I know that might sound a little confusing, but say in the example of the park, if you were to write a question that says, do you think we should make improvements? How about a new jungle gym? Well, if that's just one question, you've really asked two. And what could happen is your respondent might only answer one of them. And yeah, from Shan, it's going to skew your data. It's going to kind of goof up what you're looking for potentially, because you may have caused a little bit of confusion or expectation in what kind of an answer you were looking for. So just separate them. Ask two different questions. Do you think this park needs improvements? Second question, do you think this would be a useful improvement? It's very simple to split those up. I've already mentioned some distribution options as well as Google Forms and Microsoft. James Michael put those software options in the chat if you didn't see it. So there are some useful options in there for you for how to put out surveys. So in the terms of data analysis, there are some different things to that you might want to look at. So in terms of this park, how much data do you need to create a proper analysis? So a way to think of it might be, well, there's neighbor Joe and neighbor Bob who live right across the street from this park. So they're going to have one opinion. And if you were to only just ask those two people, you're not going to be gathering enough information on what you could do to improve that park, because chances are neighbor Bob and neighbor Joe aren't the only people who use it. But if you're looking in that 4x4 block, there could be neighbor Nancy who lives off on the corner on that 4x4, pretty far out, but she still utilizes it because she has 3 kids. Well, you're going to want her opinion too. So make sure you are asking enough people in your affected area that your proposal and your project are going to impact. Make sure you're asking enough people, especially because chances are you're going to run into a situation where some people don't respond. And if you were to only ask 10 people what they thought and say only half of them responded, that's not going to be enough information for you to really prove that, this is the project I want to do. This is how I'm going to do it. This is what this area needs. This is what this park needs. Well, no, you only got half the people. So make sure you just expand on your sample sizes. And it doesn't have to be the entire city that you're in to tell you what that park should look like. You could. I don't know that you're always going to get the best answers, because someone who lives on the complete other side of the city might not use that park. They might not care. So really just be thoughtful in who you are asking and how you are collecting that data. And what you're looking into for that data, you are going to want to look for trends. So an example of a trend, you're going to want to look at maybe consistent decreases or increases in attendance. I had mentioned earlier our equine therapy as an example, or the equine therapy as an example. So say they had implemented a new program on Saturdays and they had been offering it for a month. So there, in theory, are 4 Saturdays a month. If they were to look at the attendance on the first, second, third, and fourth Saturday, you could look at, hey, since I've implemented this program, has there been an increase in attendance? Has there been a decrease? You can look at how basically the project you're doing is impacting the people it affects, is really what it is. Ultimately, that's what it boils down to. What kind of an effect are you having? And you can utilize that data to share in your reports. You will also want to look at casual relationships. And what I mean by that is, think of it as, if we do A, then B will improve. So if we upgrade this park equipment, more people are going to attend this park and travel to this park. Or speaking on the people don't use this park in the spring and the fall. well, maybe, and you found this out doing your survey research, maybe it's because that park gets a little swampy. Maybe there's a river nearby or something, and it just gets kind of wet and people don't like using it. Well, if you were to change the landscaping, then maybe more people would use it. And you could prove that, and you could do some research. Say you, in the very beginning of spring, change the research or change the landscaping there, and you saw a direct causal relationship, that, you know, we upgraded this landscape and now more people are utilizing this park, and it's because we did this. So that's going to kind of play into also your program effectiveness. The thing that I said I was going to do and I did as a project under this grant has affected these people and this program or this park in this way. These are kind of research that you can look at and you can utilize. That's right there. All you have to do is just kind of look at what's going on and how things are related to each other, and how, you know, the impact or the effect that what you're doing has on your goal, or your, again, in this park, are people attending it? Are they not? Are they using it for different purposes? You know, say because in spring, I'm fairly certain soccer is a pretty popular spring sport. Because you change that landscaping, they can have soccer there again now. Just kind of look at those kinds of things, and, you know, it should be fairly easy information to follow. It's just paying attention to your project and what's going on. And then also, you have put so much work into this data collection and analysis. Report on it. This is the information that your funder is going to want to see, and it helps kind of really solidify and prove that your project was maybe effective. Maybe it was only partially effective, but you still had an impact. It could also prove maybe it wasn't effective, and that's okay. You still did the project and you're reporting on it. You know, this is what we did and this is the effect that it had. And those numbers or that survey research and things like that, those are going to be findings that are useful to your funder in knowing maybe they want to extend your project. Maybe they want to automatically do it again next year or something like that. There's a lot of different ways that utilizing this information could have a positive impact for you. So definitely share it out. Don't do all this work and then do nothing with it. That would be pretty silly, really. You did the work. You have something to show for what you're doing. Share it out. So now we can move on with, I think, James Michael.
Thanks, Allison.
Yeah.
We're going to skip this slide, go to the next one, Bree. I just want to say one really quick thing about why we talked about data collection and analysis. A lot of the research you do will be ahead of the grant writing process. So you'll be doing that at the beginning to do your research and get your thoughts onto paper. But also, once you get the grant, data collection analysis doesn't stop. Now is the time to switch gears and focus on how you're collecting data from the program or the project that you're running, and how do you collect the information and analyze it to understand what's happening, and then how to get more funding and to keep going on with your good work. So just kind of reiterating that once you get the grant, the work is not done. It's actually kind of just beginning. So now we're going to switch over to logic models, which is another thing that's become more apparent and more prevalent in the grant writing world. We're seeing more funders require this as part of the grant writing application. And so we want to make sure that you understand what this logic model is and how to use it and how to fill it in. But also, it's not only just because the funder wants it, it's a great tool to utilizing or to understanding and planning how to develop a program or project. If you're starting something brand new, this is a great tool to kind of understand what are your needs, what is the issue out in the community, and how you can make strategic activities and tactics that get you to this ultimate goal and impact that you're trying to achieve. So I'm going to hand it off to James Michael to kind of go through that process with us. And if you could go to the next slide, please.
Hello. Okay, so we had some great setup just now. from Allison, from Eric, and hopefully you all had a chance to go over this little logic model activity. Bree has just dropped it in the chat again, thank you. And so what we're gonna do, I'm gonna spend a pretty big chunk of the rest of this class discussing logic models. So Allison may have said some things, Eric and Shrima may have also mentioned some things that didn't quite necessarily, well, they're all gonna make, it's all gonna come together with the logic model, I should say. Because the logic model, what you have here is a visual representation of your plan, essentially, of your program. And it lets you know what are the inputs that you need to produce the outputs that you're seeking in order to state whether or not you have achieved the outcomes you're hoping for. And so, again, I'm going to speak a lot more to this, and we're going to go for each of these parts one by one, going from situations, priorities, to the inputs, to the outputs, to the outcomes, eventually getting to the impact. And we're going to work our way backwards. And then we're going to give you all a chance to do this yourself. So on the next slide, I believe I summarize everything that's coming. And I can say it one more time. Just next slide, please. Great. So yes, we're going to talk about exactly what a logic model is, what you can do with them, the differences between outputs and outcomes, and maybe some, and it's a question that comes up about whether or not outcomes and outputs need to be one-to-one matched, but we might speak more to that when we break out into our rooms. And then, yeah, we'll get a little bit further into this about timeframes or timelines rather, and how we're going to be, how this is useful for reporting. And then finally, and I might start with this one, but what I just walked through was going from inputs and resources all the way down to desired impact. But if you're not entirely sure what resources or inputs you have to bring to bear or what are necessary to achieve the impact that you're hoping to see, then we might produce this logic model backwards. So my hope is that by the end of this class, you will all be confident enough to produce your own logic models and then be able to build upon them or modify them depending on the program that you are going for. So next slide, please. So what is a logic model? I've already mentioned that it's a visual element, but it's also a tool to help with the program development process. It helps you frame your ideas. It helps you understand what exactly the situation is and how you're related to it. It also helps you to bring, I mean, you could do this by yourself, but it's very good for working in a group, in a team building activity, but also a brainstorming activity to help you all understand just who are the stakeholders that are involved in this particular problem. Allison mentioned the group of people who are nearby the park, and one person uses the park, another person can't get to the park. These are two different stakeholders, but they share one thing in common, which is they have some relationship to this park that we're trying to make a difference in. So we need their input. We need their values and their vision to be part of this program, or else it'll be something that we're doing to them and not something that we're working on together or solving together for collective impact. And then finally, the beautiful thing about a logic model is that if it it has to be logical. And when I say logical, I mean that going from left to right, from your inputs, your outputs to your outcomes, you need to be able to state, if I have these inputs, then I can produce these outputs. If I have these outputs, or if I produce these outputs, then I have evidence that I have achieved success or progress towards these outcomes. And you can work it backwards too. If I want to see these outcomes achieved, what do I need to, what evidence do I need to show me that I've achieved this outcome? Well, I need to see a certain number of these outputs. And that could be logic models, that could be survey results, that could be people pleased, or packets delivered, what have you. And then, well, what inputs do I need in order to produce these outputs? What activities do I need to undergo? How do I get from outcomes to outputs and then outputs to inputs? And if you're going from left to right, inputs to outputs, outputs to outcomes, I'm sorry if I'm switching it up too far for y'all, but if you're going from left to right, from inputs to outcomes, then you'll be asking the question, if I have X, then how do I get Y? It's an if-then type of logic. If I do X, then I'll produce Y. Now, if you're going backwards here, if you're going from your desired impact or your outcomes and trying to understand what resources, inputs you'll need, then you'll ask the question, but how? I want to see these outcomes achieved, but how? By producing these outputs, but how do I get these outputs? By engaging in these activities, but how do I even make these activities happen? Well, I need these resources and these people and this time. Bree, could you go to the next slide, please? First, or not first, but are there any questions before we go to the next slide? Excellent. Good, good, good. Okay, so the problem statement and the goal. What is the problem with our park? What's the need in our park? What is the actual problem in our park? Is it that there's no lighting? Is it that it's unkempt and it's dirty and littered all the time? Is it that it's unsafe? So first, wait, we talked about this in Grants 101, but it is stating the problem. It's not having a solution and then running around the city trying to find a problem to apply it to, but it is just being your special, unique program, doing what you do, and then recognizing that there's an opportunity for your services to provide some public good. So don't go looking for problems, but do find a place where you are needed. So how your mission, so this is a good thing, to understand who you are, your own mission, your vision, your values, and why you would even be, why would this matter to you? Why would solving a park problem, or why would addressing an issue around a park be meaningful to you? And how is that going to affect the public good? So yeah, keep in mind the situation. So be respectful of what's happened. Don't just go running into a disaster trying to buy up cheap land or something, or be considerate of folk. But also, yeah, be true to your mission, vision, and values, because they do represent your organization, and they will, honestly, they should dictate what you do and what outcomes you are trying to see by just your raison d'etre, reason for existing. So yes, you do need to state the problem and state the goal. So yes, please, next one. Yes. So this is a good one. I love this. I love this cartoon because I feel like we've all been in this situation where we had a very important concern. We saw something that needed to be addressed, but the person who was in power just didn't see things our way, or the group that was in power didn't see things our way. And they're like, yes, I see that you're bringing up an important concern, but I'm looking for a problem that better fits my preconceived notion or my preconceived solution. That's a solution looking for a problem. That is somebody looking to do something to a situation as opposed to for the collective good. And really, it's selfish, but that's not about grant writing. The next slide, please. So now we're into the real meat of it all, the planned work. All right, so you have your program, you have your idea, you know what the problem is, and you've seen how your organization and your program meets the need here and addresses this problem. And you really do believe that you have what it takes to make a difference here. So first, what you're going to want to do, and so this is one of my favorite things about the logic model, but it is helpful for just getting your plan down, writing your plan down so that it can be easily shared with others, but also so that you can see just what's supposed to follow what. So in order to make this grant writing class possible, and you'll see a bigger example of this, we'll show you this. So maybe I should just talk about the park, keep talking about the park. But in order to make the park improvement project possible, we need people to build the park equipment, or to lay down concrete, or to pick up the garbage, or change the light bulbs. Maybe this could be volunteers, maybe it could be paid staff, but time and financial or otherwise, but time and resources are what are needed to make this happen. We may need to bring some heavy equipment in, but the thing is, it's one thing to say we want to clean up a park, and it's another thing to say we need X, Y, and Z in order to clean up this park. So in order to really break it down for your funder, this is also very, I keep interrupting myself, but this is also very useful for even before you even start the responding to the RFP for the grant. You already know what it is that you're going to be asking for, what it is that you'll need. Okay, what inputs are required to make this possible. So if we have these inputs, and assuming, notice that we have assumptions here. These assumptions are what we believe are necessary in order to make all of this possible, in order to make any of this work. We're assuming that people are willing to work to clean up the park. We're assuming that people want the park improved, and we are also assuming that once the park is improved, things are going to be better, and that we'll be able to do all these activities that make improvement of the park possible. So we have the zoning, we have the equipment, we have the political and social will. All we just need to do is make the activities happen. So we have these activities that we have created and that are only possible because we have the resources that we need. So if we have these inputs, staff, time, money, then we can conduct these activities like park cleanup days, like RFPs for construction companies, like community ideas or community surveys, community polls, just trying to understand what more we could do. And then also we need participants. We need people who are, well, we need people who are going to be affected by this. We need something that's going to be affected by this. Who's to be reached? Who's going to be better off because of what we've done? This is a question that Allison also mentioned. Who's going to be better off for the work that we're doing? These are that's one of the key questions in evaluation. There's 3 key questions, but we'll get to that too. There's so much stuff that was mentioned earlier, and it all just builds upon itself. Another reason I love logic models. Before we move on to the next slide, does anybody have any questions about the planned work that goes into creating a logic model, the planned work section? Excellent, excellent. Good, 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 good. So after we have designed our planned work or settled on what the work we're going to be doing is, we know what our resource, so let me start from the beginning. We know what our vision and vision are. We know what the need is. And so now that we know what the need is, if we want to address that need, then we need these people, we need time, we need money and resources. If we have these things, then we can conduct these activities that we're hoping to achieve, such as park cleanup day, changing the light bulbs, picking up the trash, bringing the people in. Okay, so now that we've done these activities, what is the result of this planned work? The result of planned work are known as outputs. And so the outputs that we're going to be seeing are, how to say it? The results we're going to, the results that we're going to be seeing come from the surveys that we conduct, the results of the survey. So we gave a survey to people. Do you like the park now? Yes, no. Very simple. Like, we want to know, we're very basic with these surveys. We just want to know if we have achieved what we set out to achieve. Are you satisfied with the park? Yes, no. What changes might you make in the park? Open-ended. And then finally, also just looking at just the actual results of the work that we did. How many light bulbs were changed? How many pounds of trash were cleaned up? How many volunteers did we bring in on this project? How much time and labor went into completing this project? So once we have these outputs, we'll be able to say yes or no, we have achieved some, we have achieved our short-term, medium-term, or long-term outcomes. And so in the short term, and I mean like in the very, very short term, you all can use yourselves as an example. We can use this class as an example right now. But the very short term change that I'm hoping to achieve, or short-term outcome that I'm hoping to achieve, is that you all are just aware of how the logic model process goes. You all have some knowledge about how to design a logic model, and maybe we'll shift your attitude towards planning your work before you engage in a grant proposal, or even shift your attitude towards program design. And then even give you some skills to work with after this class, such as logic model design, program evaluation. These are very short-term outcomes, but they can happen either in the middle of this course or at the end of the course. But what we would be seeing, or the outputs that we would be looking for in order to determine whether we have achieved this short-term result would come in the form of a survey, or even looking at the logic models that hopefully you all will produce by the end of this course, okay? So the next thing that happens, once you've learned something new, you usually go out and do something different. Maybe you just read that an apple a day keeps the doctor away. Are you going to eat more apples or eat less apples? Either way, you just learned something new. Whatever you do with that knowledge is a changed action, except unless if you don't change your action. But if you eat more apples, changed action. Eat less apples, changed action. This is a behavioral difference. And so these are some of the things. I mean, that's a very light example, but we could make it even heavier when it comes to social action, or changing policies, or just changing people's practices. For instance, with the park, one of the medium-term outcomes that we might see after this park improvement project is that more people decide to visit the park. People act differently when they're in the park. They're exercising instead of sitting, or they are walking their dogs and laughing instead of just walking by. These are outputs that can be measured to inform us about the medium-term outcome. Okay. And finally, once we've learned better and we started doing better, then ideally, this will cause a change in our society, or in our environment, our economy. But overall change occurs, like a global change. So more people are going to the park. So first off, more people know the park is cleaned up. More people start going to the park and visiting the park and doing different things in the park. So supposing more people are exercising in the park and getting out more, then the overall change, the ultimate impact that we're going to see and that we're hoping to see is improved health, improved well-being, improved social standing, or just social connections. These are less, less tangible and less direct, but by using these outputs that we have, we're creating this chain of logic that builds up to this ultimate impact, so that we can say by this chain of logic that we saw a problem and a need, we saw how our organization fit into that, like we had a solution that fit that need, that met that need. And so we gathered the inputs and resources that we needed. in order to do the activities that we had planned, in order to produce the outputs that we need to see in order to state whether or not we have been successful in achieving the outcomes and finally the desired impact that we want. But one thing, the best laid plans, right? One thing that happens, or that we always need to take account of, are the external factors that just, you don't have any control over this. I wish I had the president on my speed dial and I could just hit him up and say, hey, can you pass an executive order that gives every my age $1 million? Hey, that's pretty cool. But I don't have that ability, right? I don't have that ability. Another external factor that I think that we can all relate to is this pandemic, COVID, and these restrictions keeping us from meeting in person. If your program is dependent on serving people face to face, then that is an external factor that will definitely influence whether or not your program is successful. We saw a lot of programs that had to either pause their services or just stop until this COVID thing passes. So these are external factors that they could explain. I mean, it's not something that we know, nobody saw COVID coming. But these are some factors that you might want to look out for, okay? And be aware of. It doesn't have to be as drastic as COVID. It could really just be an election is coming up and we don't know how the city council is going to vote on this zoning issue. Or it could be that we just had some extreme incident happen in our community and people just shifted their attention away from our program and our project. We gotta focus on other things. And so that's why we didn't achieve the numbers that we hope to see. But knowing what these external factors are will help you explain why you did not achieve the impact that you were hoping to achieve. And they also might help you work around or knowing what they are or having some plan for working around these external factors might also help you get to that ultimate impact because you know what you're working against. Okay, so that was a lot. But all to sum it up with Dr. Maya Angelou, I first learned this quote in 2013. I discovered it yesterday, or I remembered yesterday after going through. Anyways, do the best you can until you know better. And then when you know better, do better. I believe this perfectly sums up the continuous quality improvement process, but also it sums up the logic model ideal. Because in the short term, medium term, and long term, these are the elements that we're talking about. Learn better in the short term, you do better in the medium term, and by doing better, we change our world in the long term. Does anyone have any questions about logic models, inputs, outputs, outcomes, and impact? Hey, okay.
I just want to say thank you for the quote from Maya Angelou.
Oh, you're very welcome. Okay, well, that's all I have on this part. Psych. I'm sorry, y'all. We did talk about, I mean, it does feel like after all that, it does feel like that was a great wrap up to logic models. But I just want to reiterate, it's a good tool for consensus building. Once you know what this is, you can bring your logic model to other people in the community. For instance, if you did not bring in the people who lived around the park and you didn't do a community survey, once you've done your logic model, once you've prepared your program, that might be a good time to share with others in the community. Identify who is needed to make this solution possible, and then share it with them. Share your logic model with partners. I know that here in Flint and Genesee Group, we partner with a few organizations in the city, but it's is for collective impact. We can do more together. We can go further together. We can go forward together, hint, hint. So as far as brainstorming goes, I already mentioned that the logic model, again, you share it with others, you use it to get your ideas down to make sure that your solution is sound in terms of logic goes. If the if-then chain, if there's a break in the if-then piece, then you need to figure out what needs to be pieced together here. Because if I clean up this park, then I decrease world hunger, doesn't necessarily jibe there. That's a break in logic. You need to be more explicit in how those two things are causally related. It helps with program planning, helps with program management. And then again, as far as consensus building goes, it's helpful for communicating with stakeholders. And a personal idea, I just think it looks cool, and it's something that can be built upon over time. It's a living document. And after the program is said and done, you can review the logic model and when you're doing your reporting, and just it's a template more or less for your reporting process. Aside from what your funders explicitly stated they wanted to see in the reporting. Other ideas or questions here? Inspirations even? Excellent.
Thanks, Michael.
Yes.
One thing I wanted to suggest in here too is to track weather. Many of the projects that we do, the attendance can be measured in how bad the storms are that day, if it's too hot, if it's too cold. What we do so that we can still get the food out to folks or the program that we're doing. But at the same time, when I'm sitting down doing some analyzations for reporting, I forget that, oh my goodness, we had 4 days of severe snow or heat. So that impacts what the service was that we were going to provide, and the numbers just aren't there.
Certainly. Yeah, no, that's a perfect example of an external factor that affects whether or not you achieve the outcomes you're setting to see. We can't control the weather, but knowing that the weather is something that greatly affects turnout in your program, you might look at the Farmer's Almanac, or you might look at the Weather Service and check the schedule for the rest of the year or the outlook for the decade. Farmer's Almanacs are surprisingly accurate. It's weird. You didn't think you would be able to check the weather like that, but yeah, I guess we're slaves to our smartphones and our daily 24-hour weather service. Anything else? So thank you again. That was a very, very good, helpful suggestion. Great. All right, so this is you all have this form. I believe you all have something like this, but this is just a blank logic model. And we shared this with you so that you'd be able to kind of create your own. But what I'm gonna do here is just go through one more time, very briefly, what the logic model is, some of the questions that you'll see, and what some of the sections are about. So got a problem statement, boom, we know what the problem is. We wanna fix a park. Well, nobody's going to the park. So our goal is to get more people in the park. So our planned work, again, what people, funding, space, do we need to do the proposed work? We need volunteers, we need light bulbs, we need trash cans, trash bags, maybe some earth movers. And what we're gonna do with these resources or these inputs, the activities we're going to engage in are cleaning up the park, changing some light bulbs, improving the space, beautifying the space. But how will we know we were successful? How will we know these activities made any difference? Well, first, we got to take some measurements while we're doing the activities. So measuring the amount of people that were there, measuring the amount of time that went into it, maybe the pounds of garbage that we receive, the light levels that were changed as a result of installing light bulbs. And then finally, so what's going to change as a result of these I mean, we see these outputs, we see these changes, but what is really going to change? What's going to happen in the short term? What's going to happen in the medium term? What are people going to do once they know something has happened? How will people know that something has happened? And when they do know, what are they going to do? And when they do that thing, what is that effect going to be on their greater world? So keep in mind some assumptions that you have about your planned work. You do believe, I mean, the greatest assumption that you have is that my project is going to make the difference. That's good, kind of goes without saying, but it does need to be said because people forget that they're part of this too. They're assuming that their project is going to make a difference. And then we think about the external factors that affect whether or not we get the intended results that we're working for. So in brief, assumptions are affecting whether or not the planned work will even be possible. The external factors affect whether or not you will achieve your intended results. Okay, that's from left to right. On the next slide, I think we have it filled out for our grant writing class, and I'm going to go from right to left here. Okay, so our desired impact for this Grants 201 class and Grant Writing 101 class, and just for us in general, is just to improve the quality of life for Genesee County residents through increased aid and services. But ideally that when you come out of this grant writing class, what you do will bring some collective good to our society. But how will we know that we've achieved that impact? How will we know we've improved quality of life for Genesee County residents? Well, we'll know because, well, we'll assume because you all will write amazing grants and receive them as well. If not amazing grants, just better grants. But you all will write better grants and will more likely than not be accepted for those grants. But how will we know that you all will write better grants and more likely than not be accepted for them? Because you will know how to produce logic models. You will have gone through the Grant Writing 101, Grant Writing 202 or 201 courseware, and you will feel confident enough to do this yourself. But how will we know that? Because you filled out our little survey at the end of this class, because you are here now receiving this information. These are some outputs that we can just measure: attendance, survey results, just show of hands, is everybody satisfied right now, kind of thing. And then, but how will we know that? I mean, how will we even be able to get these outputs? Well, first we have to take part in some activities, like giving you a survey, asking you questions, providing this class to you and these worksheets to you, and even just being here. But how will we make these activities possible? Well, we need ourselves. We needed Bree to help bring us two groups together, the grants writing team and yourselves together. And we needed the time between 8:30 and 11 to make this all possible. Plus support, plus Zoom, plus electricity, which we just assume is going to be constant, and there are going to be no technical issues. So once we have done this planned work, then we should be able to say that our goal will be achieved. Okay. So that was the if then. What I just did was the but how logic model. And right before that, I did the if then logic model, going from left to right. So before we move on to the next slide, are there any questions that I can answer right now? Okay, I think we are all at peace here. So why should you care? Aside from just showing funders that you're serious about your project, and showing subordinates, or not subordinates, superiors, that you know your stuff. It's just a due diligence thing. You're working with other people's money and changing other people's lives or affecting other people's lives. So you really want to be able to efficiently use your resources, use your time and energy, which are personally, they're two things that you'll never get back. These are the only things of value in this world. So just making sure that you're using them wisely and efficiently and have a plan for what you're going to do with them. If it's not for preserving your own time and energy, then think about the other people that will be caught up in this program or your solution if you don't design it well and you don't think about the logic behind it. In that case, you'll just be roping in a lot of people into a project that you're going to be doing to people for your own selfish solution needs. You want to see something happen, just like the guy in the cartoon earlier. So it's yeah, that's partly why you should care. Are there any other? Does anyone else want to say anything about that though? Okay, and just the final word then is just that this is a great tool for reporting, for planning, and for building consensus and identifying stakeholders so that we can all get the collective impact that we desire.
All right, thanks, James. We're gonna do a quick activity real quick where we allow you guys to, we're gonna go into breakout rooms. And as before, Bree dropped in all right, everybody, well, welcome back to our full-size course here. We've just finished our breakout rooms, and hopefully everyone had a chance to at least explain their organization and maybe even start to fill in a logic model chain for one or maybe a couple people in your breakout room. Would anyone like to share some things that they didn't understand or know about logic models and how this process is, you know, if it's helpful for you or if it's made you think about something new? Anyone want to share?
Eric, I'd just like to say that before you showed me the logic model, I had some conceptions of my own of how to do something, but this really clarifies it in something that I can share with my board and other leaders, that here it is in black and white. It's written out for us. Now we can implement it without saying, well, what do other larger groups do or what can we do? So I've been very impressed with what I've learned this morning.
Thank you.
Great, thanks, Barb. Anyone else want to share about their thoughts on logic models and how to use them? All right. Well, we'll take a short 15-minute break, and we'll come back. And if you think about something that you might want to share with the group as a whole, we can quickly debrief and then get back into our presentation, and we'll get into evaluation. So let's put 15 minutes on the clock and go ahead, get a restroom break in there and maybe fill up your coffee or coffee this early in the morning. But I just wanted to quickly give an opportunity for anyone else to share on their thoughts on logic models before we move on to our last half of the course, which we'll dive into here. Anyone want to speak on logic models real quickly?
One thing that I would add into my logic model would be, as Fish said, is the weather. I never really even thought about adding that part in there as to when someone else reads it, that what type of weather it was and how it played a part.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, obviously the last year and a half, we've had to do everything outdoors. So that definitely has a huge impact on how successful a program can be. And then also thinking about, having backup plans too. So that kind of makes it helps you think about it when you're kind of sharing your results to your funder, but also in the planning portion of it. Maybe it's, if we're going to have outdoor events, should we have a contingency plan? So it kind of helps in both ways.
Yes, thank you, Fish.
Anyone else? Anyone else before we move on?
I would just like to say in my group, one very helpful, I guess, conclusionary statement was that something that will help us all in this is just changing the perception in the community that nonprofits have money, or that larger established institutions in the community have money, and that it's not the place of the community members to support those things with their own dollars, which is why we end up having to write grants, or a lot more grants than we might need to write if we had better funding sources, but from the community.
And I had another takeaway from our group. I just would sort of like to remind all of us that we need to be, I don't want to say less focused in our thinking, I guess more idealistic in our thinking, if we can. You know, we tend to stay a little bit on the surface when we're doing logic models. We put in, you know, this is the program I want to do, and so these are the people that I want to serve, and this is the impact that we're trying to prove. And it's not always as cut and dry as we would think it to be. Like we discussed a facilities improvement proposal, that the impact on the surface of a facilities improvement proposal is just that the facility is improved, right? Like we get to use it for more stuff and we get to do more things, but the reality of the matter is that it will increase health outcomes for elder communities. And that's not the kind of thing that people would normally assume would happen by installing some facilities upgrades. But I just would challenge us all to think beyond the immediate outcome of what our programming can do to the overall impact that it'll make on our long-term community.
Absolutely, that's a great point. We almost talked about the exact same thing in our group about a facility project to get a facility, but also tying that into the ultimate impact beyond just, you know, getting the facility. That's a great, you know, long-term goal, but it's ultimately about serving the community. And so, yeah, the long-term impact, it may seem aspirational, but that's great. That's what it's meant to be. It's meant to be inspiring to get you to that place and the things that you need to get there to help you get to that ultimate impact you're trying to make. So that's a great point to make. Thank you. Any other quick thoughts on logic models before we go on? I think we're kind of getting close to our time here. Bree, if you could go up ahead 2 slides, if possible, that will get us started. So on the back half of this presentation, we're going to cover 2 things primarily. We're going to cover the evaluation process, which covers beginning, middle, and end of a grant life cycle, and how to think about evaluating and what types of evaluation are needed at different parts of the grant cycle. And then lastly, we're going to dive a little bit deeper into budgets. We're going to cover some things that we covered in Grants 101, but we're going to go a little bit deeper as well. So I'm going to hand it off to Sharima, who will lead the conversation on evaluations.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Eric. All right. So in terms of evaluations, how do you speak to the success of a program? Well, a program evaluation seeks to answer several questions similar to that one, and many of which are here on this slide, as well as others. Does the program work? How may it be improved? What will be measured? For instance, a tutoring program may measure reading levels. What's your baseline? Another, for instance, the number of 3rd graders reading below grade level is a baseline for measuring the results of an expanded tutoring program. Is the program worthwhile? Did it have unintended consequences Was it useful? These are questions that evaluations will ask and attempt to answer. In the bottom right corner, you'll see a link to an excellent resource about evaluations. We're going to touch on several evaluations today, but that link down there at the bottom, which is part of Dr. Jean Shackman's program evaluation for beginners, you can have a look down there and they'll go into a lot of great detail that will take you further beyond our presentation today. Next slide, please. Great. So the evaluation answers the what, whom, when, and where, and how the program does what it is intended to do, and whether these procedures are able to be carried out. Are they ethical? Are they feasible? Are they cost effective? Can they be generalized across programming? If you have multiple sites for your program, can your results be generalized across those multiple sites? At the end of it all, you'll be able to say what your program does, whether the outcomes happened the way that you anticipated that they would. Can you say, because if we did X, Y happened? So funders, please fund us so that we can have X to make Y happen again. These are some of the questions that evaluations will answer and respond to. Next slide, please. So before you get into the evaluation, there are things that you will want to consider. The most important is that you're not doing harm to human subjects. So you'll want to cultivate your evaluation questions so that they will not trigger your participants. Now, sometimes you cannot know what may activate a person that you're talking to, or especially in a qualitative manner. Qualitative being interview style, conversational style, and also mixed methods may include interview conversations, as well as surveys. So you'll want to craft questions that are thoughtful, utilizing contextual consideration. If you are talking to people in a particular context, you'll want to be careful of how those questions are worded. And of course, always using cultural competence to also inform the questions that you may ask. One aspect of this is called the concerns-based adoption model, or CBAM, as it's known in the evaluation field. This is a model of change that provides a framework for the change process. And it serves to also helps to remind the evaluator that every evaluation has two components, an emotional component and a capability component. Each of us experiences change differently. And for evaluators, it is essential to recognize the potential impact of your questions, as well as the recommendations that you'll make at the very end of your evaluation. Those recommendations will be given to the stakeholders, especially the team that may have hired you to do the evaluation, unless you are a member of that team and you're conducting the evaluation for your own program. And so again, CBAM, or concerns-based adoption model, is a way of being able to acknowledge that and helping further along towards implementation. Before the evaluation, know your timeline and be realistic about it. Stick to your plan to ensure that everything happens as scheduled and on time. The timeline will help you adjust if you need to, and to see what revisions need to be made to your overall design. A timeline helps very much to keep the efficiency of the evaluation moving forward. You'll want to lay out what the evaluating team's responsibilities will be. There are a lot of moving parts to a program, as well as to your evaluation. You'll want to decide what information will be collected, when will it be collected, and how. Who will do the collection of that information? Who will reach out to participants? Who will be the participants that you'll reach out to? These are all things that will need to be talked about. How will the data be analyzed? Will it be analyzed via software? There are a few software programs on the market that you can use, such as NVivo or Atlas TI. These are interactive software programs for qualitative data collection. I have happened to use both, in fact. What reports will be produced? When and how will they be used? All of these are questions that should be asked and answered at the beginning of the evaluation before it really fully gets underway. You'll also want to provide a budget for the evaluation. You may want to include staffing or materials and office supplies. In terms of staffing, who is going to staff the evaluation? If you're doing an evaluation, if you are hiring evaluators, then they will have, the staffing. If you are this is your program and you're evaluating it, then you will include that on the budget. You'll include yourself, and if you have another team member who's helping you, you will include the individuals on the budget who are conducting the evaluation. You'll include materials and office supplies, including postage for surveys or postcards that you will need to send to participants of the evaluation. You may include equipment, and this could be computers, the software, such as what I mentioned, or maybe you needed a Microsoft Office suite or other software. It may include audio recorders for your conversational interview conversations. It may also include travel for meetings to the administrators of the program, or for travel to your research participants or to the sites for the program. You may even give conference presentations about your results. So that will also be included in terms of travel. So having a budget is also what helps keep you on task. All right, next slide, please. So here are the steps to conducting an effective evaluation. And so first, you'll engage and establish who your stakeholders are. So these will be the program administrators, the people or the population that the program is designed to serve. It may be their families as well. It will very likely be your funders, potential funders, as well as those who may have already said, yes, we will fund you. Sometimes they'll say yes, and you need to do an evaluation. So they are, of course, your stakeholders. Your board of directors or any other board that you may be associated with the program. Members of the community at large. Anyone who may be associated with any way to your program is considered a stakeholder. And you will need their input to create a successful solution. So secondly, you'll describe your program. And this is where your logic model is really important. Now, you can even create the logic model in accordance with your stakeholders. You can bring them all on board. You can have an official meeting. It could be on Zoom. It could be in person one day. Again, we know we'll get there. So to explain to your team and the greater community what your program is designed to do and how you're going to get there to that ultimate goal, which is impact, which I'm going to talk about. So once you understand the aspects of the program that you hope to provide, then you can create the proper evaluation design. They all answer certain questions, and depending on what it is that you want to understand is how you will design your evaluation. And we're going to talk about some designs in just a moment. Once you know what you're trying to evaluate, this is when the data collection begins. So for instance, if you would like to understand that if there are more people in the park that we talked about earlier, after we created the built environment of the playground equipment, we might gather data on public perceptions of the park and their attendance. This may be with survey takers who stand at the entrance of the park and they survey children and families who may come in, children and or adults. Sometimes you may have a survey specifically for children and specifically for adults, or one that anyone in the family can answer. And so then you can make conclusions that are based on the analysis, and you'll have the evidence to back it up. Finally, you'll write reports for the stakeholders and especially your funders. The funders always want to understand how their funding was spent. And so sometimes you'll have an interim report that might be collected to be 6 months into the program, and you'll almost always have a final report that will take place at a set date after the program is finished. Sometimes it's due 30 days after a program ends. You'll share those reports with everyone who was in the process. It will go to your funder, and then the others may be upon request. It may go straight to your board, et cetera, et cetera. Once you've shared your findings, the next time the program will come back around, hopefully you've made the adjustments to it that shows the continuous improvement, which is the core of why we evaluate. Next slide, please. If you're not sure whether your program can be evaluated, then this is when you'll conduct a needs assessment. Is there data that can be collected? See if it's feasible to go forward with an evaluation before you spend resources measuring an impact that may or may not be there yet. It may not be measurable yet. I'll talk about that in a minute. A process evaluation ensures everything is going the way you intended it to go. For instance, was the playground equipment in place on time? Was it were the appropriate pieces of playground equipment there? Did you decide ahead of time you were going to have a merry-go-round, a slide, and 6 swings? Were they all there in place? That's a process evaluation. An outcome evaluation will measure if your program is having the effect that you want it to have. For instance, is the park creating opportunities for families to come together? Are people using the space for recreation? Is it attracting activities that are child and family friendly? These are questions that you would want to ask in an outcome evaluation. Finally, an impact evaluation measures the ultimate goal of your program, and that is impact. If the goal, for instance, was to increase attendance, well, did you? A basic impact statement, which could show that if you have more people attending than you had originally, then yes, your program may have had that effect. There could be other factors as well, but you can show, yes, we had X number of people before, and now we have double X number of people attending here, or even more. So these are the types of evaluations that you can do. And there are others as well. These are the ones that we will talk about today. Next slide, please. So as James Michael shared, the logic models work to clearly outline your program, and they can do the same thing for your evaluation design. Logic models can help you understand which type of evaluation that you will wish to design. So if you haven't started the program yet, you might do a needs evaluation. And we're going to talk about a little more detail about that in the next few slides. If you have already started the program, then you can do a process evaluation. And understand that a process evaluation can be done anytime that the program is being implemented. If you've already done the planned activities, then you might look to an outcomes evaluation to understand the degree to which the program is having its effect. And an impact evaluation always takes place at the end because we can't measure impact before anything has happened. So deciding how your evaluation fits in with the logic model, you might decide which of these are more appropriate. So let's go a little more in depth into understanding what types of program evaluation that we're going to cover today. And next slide, please. So a needs assessment is a formative evaluation, and that focuses on what services are needed and who needs them in the community. Now, a formative evaluation is aimed at providing information to improve a program while it is in operation. So you want to understand who has the need. What programs are already in existence to address these needs? And this is a very important question also to ask when it comes to grant writing, because funders do not like to fund repetitive programs. They want to know that your program is creating an original result. It's providing a common good with an original result that other programs, maybe you might have some overlap with other programs, but funders like to understand that there is not a lot of repetition happening between programs in the community. And so if the funder says, well, actually your program looks very similar to this program over here, what are you offering that's different? That's what you'll want to understand. What is it that you're offering that nobody else can do? or that nobody else is offering. So the assumptions that we're making, the assumptions may be back to the park. The assumptions may be that anybody, well, of course, everybody wants to come to this park. So we want to check that as well. Have people moved on to a different green space in another neighborhood? These are some assumptions that we're making. You want to understand the assumptions. Next slide, please. So the process evaluation is also formative in that it examines the methods used and whether the program is operating according to plan. So who are we reaching? How is the program operating? And to what extent? Why is it happening? And why is it working? And if it isn't working, why is that as well? That's what this type of evaluation, a process evaluation, seeks to understand and answer. Next slide, please. So an outcomes evaluation is a summative evaluation, and in fact that it measures results, how much change the program produces. A summative evaluation looks at a program's effectiveness in order to make decisions as to whether we should continue or discontinue the program. And of course, in between those two decisions of continue and discontinue, there's a spectrum of how we are going to make improvements to the program to make sure that it's working and to make sure that it's effective. So this is where we will measure the effect on the target population's behaviors. Did we accomplish what we promised? What changed in terms of learning and action? And especially the question, was it effective? Next question, next slide, please. The impact evaluation is also summative in that it too measures effectiveness. How did the program meet its ultimate goal? Or did it meet its ultimate goal? And of course, that ultimate goal is established back at the level of your logic model in terms of the long-term impacts. Ascribing a value and meaning to the work that you did. This is how the impact evaluation does. And what did we learn? Funders always want to understand what it is that you learned along the way. Who benefited from what we did? Again, something funders will always want to see in your final reports. And so you'll give those demographics about who your program benefited. And how did they benefit? Well, one way you can find that out, again, is through surveys and qualitative interview conversations. So impact evaluations may also be conducted years later, sometimes 3 or 5 years later, and certainly at the end of a program when you will see the impact. That's when an impact evaluation is very effective. All right, next slide, please. So these are some program evaluation resources. This is not a comprehensive list by any means, but it is one that we believe we've compiled and that we feel have some very good resources for you. Firstly is the University of Michigan Flint Evaluation of Services and Programs Pub 508 course. I myself have taken this course and I absolutely recommend it. It helped my knowledge greatly. This is part of their Masters in Public Administration course, but you don't have to be enrolled in the MPA program to take this course. You can follow the link there to the catalog and it'll tell you a little bit about all those courses there, especially including that one, as well as give you some contact information too. And you can tell them Sharima sent you and that you learned about it here in the Grants 201 workshop. And so another source that we found very useful is with the University of Arkansas Extension and with their program evaluation roadmap. You might also look at OSU's tools for planning and implementing program evaluation. The Innovation Network and also the Kellogg Foundation have excellent logic model resources. I have actually taken 2 classes, 2 totally different from different organizations that both utilized the Kellogg Foundation logic model development guide. And so that one is clearly vetted in the field. And the CDC also lists types of evaluations. And of course, you may come across others that you may also find just as useful too. All right, next slide, please. And so finally, your evaluation will establish your organization's credibility. and then you can use positive evaluation results as the centerpiece of a public relations effort. So good results can be used in your grant proposals to show that your organization delivers on what it promises to do. And that is credibility. It shows a commitment to measurement, that you are those measurements that I talked about. It shows that your evaluation shows that you have a commitment to measurements. And it gives you a visual tool to be able to look at your program specifically and to say, yes, this is successful. Yes, we'll make tweaks over here. Maybe we'll do away with this aspect, but it gives you a visual of how your program is being effective and impactful in the community. It helps you with your reporting. And of course, those reports are what lead to further funding. And that can also give you a multiple diverse stream of revenue. It gives you a blueprint and an outline for your success. An evaluation is very much, as we said, it's connected to your logic model. And the logic model also gives that blueprint and that outline. It's a very useful tool when you want to educate and inform stakeholders, especially maybe you might have new stakeholders come on board who came in after you planned your evaluation before that. This will always be there to inform your stakeholders, perhaps your board of directors, especially if they have term limits on their seats. So you have a new board of directors. And so your evaluation is very useful in so many ways to inform your stakeholders. And it will help to achieve the ultimate goal of any evaluation, which is continuous quality improvement. All right, thank you. And that concludes our evaluation section. And Eric is next to talk with you about grant budgets. Eric, you are on mute.
Thanks, Sharima. Sorry about that. Are there any questions on the evaluation process or what we presented on evaluations today before we get into budgets? All right. If you do, just pop those in the chat and we'll get to them as well. So lastly, we want to talk about budgets a little bit further. We talked about them pretty extensively in 101. But we wanted to make sure we covered some more complex issues on budgets as well. So this first slide is more or less a little bit of a recap, but basically the budget tells you and the funder specifically what you are requesting line item by line item. You're going to go through and you're going to show them all the revenue sources that you have. So if you have multiple foundations or multiple sources of revenue coming in, you'll show them all of those revenue sources and how much money you have total. And then the expense line items will show you how you're spending that specifically. You need to build your budgets with realistic and actual numbers. Don't make up figures, don't generalize, or don't, like thinking about it in a way like, well, $10,000 would cover this and that'll be good enough. You should really do some research, look into how much things actually cost in preparing those budgets. And that's pretty common knowledge anyways. Also, double check your math. Have multiple eyes on that budget if possible. A budget that has issues or errors will kind of put up a red flag to a funder that maybe this application isn't fully thought out or hasn't been fully researched or vetted. So make sure that that budget piece is accurate as possible. Be very thorough because if you are underspent or overspent, which we'll talk about in a little bit, your organization might have to take on the costs, especially if you're overspending. So you want to make sure you have those accurate costs in your budget so that you don't potentially have to spend your own dollars on a project when you have grant dollars for them. If provided, use the funder's budget template. That makes the budget piece easy for them to review. They know exactly what they're looking for. So if a budget template has been provided, go ahead and use that. If there is not a budget template on the website or that not attached to that RFP, then go ahead and make your own and just try to be as thorough as possible. We've mentioned that your program officer is that point of contact between you and the funder. That's the person you're going to be talking to every time you have a question. And so if you do have questions, please make sure that those are being asked to your program officer. If you have to make a change, then go ahead and ask that program officer first before you go ahead and just do it. Next slide, please. So in-kind costs and cash, those are kind of two concepts that sometimes get a little bit confusing, in-kind specifically. So in-kind costs are items that are contributed to your organization, contributed by your organization, where no direct cash is exchanged. So for instance, if your staff members are going to be working on a project, but you're not going to charge the staff time, that's some donated time. Or let's say you're doing the park project and you already have yards and yards and yards of mulch somewhere stored up and you don't need to buy new mulch. You can contribute that mulch, let the value of that be known, and that will be considered part of your budget. Other things like donated space. So if you have a big community room or if you have little offices that can be used, that can be considered in kind as well. Or technical assistance and consulting is another option of that. Cash is literally what it sounds like. Cash is something that you have on hand that you can contribute to a project budget that you will be utilizing. So, and that's always a good thing to show too. It shows a funder that you have some skin in the game, that you are willing to put your own dollars into a project. And so it's not just a wash if the project fails and the grantor or the funder dollars have been spent and not your own. You want to make sure that you're showing your contribution as well. Next slide, please. Indirect costs versus direct costs. So indirect costs are sometimes hard to kind of figure out, but mostly what an indirect cost are things that are difficult to assign to a specific project. And it's not necessarily totally associated with providing service during your grant project or program. Oftentimes this is called the budget overhead. And a lot of times that can be things like the electricity that you need, or marketing that you're going to be putting out that you've already got on hand, or utilities or professional development. These are things that are not necessarily directed specifically to the project, but do help maintain the overall efficiency of the program and such. One thing to note that these are allowable on state and federal grants, and usually there's an indirect rate that's already been pre-established, like 10% or 5%. And that's something that you put on your budget template at the beginning. Usually private foundations and family foundations do not allow for this. So they want to do those foundations and family foundations, they want to pay for the direct costs. And that's the things that are specifically assigned to this program. So the supplies you need, the program staff wages that of those folks who are working on the project. If you have to purchase materials, so like our park project, the actual equipment that you need, those swings and slides and all that stuff, those are the direct costs for a program. Next slide, please. So restricted funds and unrestricted funds. Restricted funds are parts of a grant that the money has to be used for specific purposes. So the restrictions will be listed in the grant agreement, and they will need to be reported on at the end of the grant period. And so these things could mean, like, for instance, some people don't want to pay for staffing or wages or professional development. They want to pay for just the things that are going to help make a project happen. And so if by them saying that they don't want to pay for professional development, that means you can't use it in that area, but you can use it everywhere else that they have said is allowable. Unrestricted funds are the ones that are most desirable. These are grant dollars or donations that are just given, and you are told that you can use them in any way that you need as part of the project. If that's to pay for utilities or to pay for staff wages or professional development, you have that option. It's up to you. You are the one who picks that out, and they'll know those costs ahead of time because they've seen the budget. Next slide, please. Some other financial management terms that you might want to pay attention to: a fiscal sponsor or fiduciary. That is an organization that is an experienced, credible nonprofit that has the ability to be a lead on a grant application. And they will be the ones that technically are the ones applying to the grant, and they're the ones that receive it. But your organization, which is probably a brand new nonprofit, or maybe it's not quite there yet, has the opportunity to still do the grant project and is still able to carry out that work, but you are working on becoming more credible, more experienced. And so you have to have a partner that has that credibility, that a funder wants to make sure there's some oversight on that. And so that's what a fiscal sponsor is. I briefly mentioned underspend and overspend. So underspend is when you don't spend all of the grant dollars and you may have to return the funds, which is something funders don't necessarily want. They want the dollars to go out and make the largest impact possible. And so if you have to return funds, or you think you're being thrifty and just saving money, that's not the best. You want to make sure that you're getting as close to that full amount as possible, because you don't want to have to return those monies. Overspend's the opposite. So when you are overspending, that means you're spending more than the grant budget allows. And you really want to pay attention to that as the program or project is happening, because if that is something that you're foreseeing, that's going to be something that's coming out of your pocket directly and not the funder. You can go ahead and ask a funder if they would be willing to support that, but most likely they're not going to. They're going to tell you, this was what we agreed to, and this is what you need to stick to. There are cases where that might be allowable, but that's really based on the relationship between you and your funder. Matching funds are, like I said before, it's that cash match that you have on hand that your organization is putting in to a project. And it's usually cash match. There are opportunities where you can have in-kind match, but really it's a cash match option. And that's really, again, to show that you have skin in the game. Diversified revenue sources. Funders don't want to be the only source of revenue for a project or a program. They want to see that there's other people involved too. And that helps with sustainability. So by having a diversified revenue sources, you will make sure that your program and project will continue, even if one or two funders drop off after years of participating. So it's always really great to have revenue coming in from different areas. Lastly, the budget narrative. That's going to just put into words how you are putting your budget together. So you're going to go through and explain in a paragraph all of the revenue sources that are available and all of the expenses that you're putting out there. And that is just in another way for someone who maybe not understands all of the nuances within your budget spreadsheet. So it just gives a little more context to how you're spending the grant dollars. Next slide, please. The last kind of major terms that we want to get out to you today are the differences between blended and braided funding. So blended funding is when two or more sources come together to fund a program. And those costs may not be tracked by individual funding sources. And other funders may not know that they share a program costs. So for instance, let's say our park cleanup project costs $25,000 to complete. And we want to raise those dollars through grant funding. So we start seeking out funders who give us $5,000 grants. So if our project budget is $25,000 total, that means we need to seek out 5 different granting funding organizations that will help our project. They don't know who they are in relationship to each other unless you are letting them know ahead of time. But you're trying to fill in the gaps by blending in funding from different sources. Braiding funding is different. It's in that you get the funders together ahead of time, you tell them their project, and then they pick out the pieces that they want to pay for. So everyone is at the table up front. They know what the need is in the community, and they really want to support it. And so they are going to meet, you are all going to meet together, and you're going to figure out how big of a project we can get going with multiple sources of revenue, and how do all of your revenue sources fit into this project. And that's going to be all planned out before any grant submissions even put together. So those are the main two differences between those two types of funding and how you put them together. Are there any questions so far on the budget pieces we talked about today? Great, so let's go ahead to the next slide. We're just going to do a quick budgeting activity, and I'm going to put these scenarios in front of you, and we'll fill in ourselves what that budget might look like. And so we'll go on to the next slide, and I'll read this to you. Yep, so in the white columns, we have put together a budget based on a program that we're planning to put together that cost $100,000. Now, in column A, we did not reach our total of $100,000 like we needed. And so we have decided, where do we want to put some of our funding in place here to make sure that our program is still going to happen, even though we didn't raise $100,000. And so you'll see here that we kept the administrative staff about the same. We kept our program staff about the same as well. We took a little bit out of there because we have to do a smaller program, they might not have to work as many hours. So that might be where there's a little reduction there. We've had to reduce the supplies and materials by $5,000 because we don't have enough of a revenue to do that. And so the project will probably have to be smaller. Travel, we cut that in half because travel sometimes is difficult to obtain, especially in these days. If it would have been during this past year, I would have cut that down to 0. But you're most likely not needing to travel as far if the project is smaller. And that's kind of the gist of the rest of this going forward, is that the rest of the column is we're just trying to take out a little bit of money in these spaces so that we can at least make sure that the project happens. If you go to the next slide, for column B, the funder wants to make sure that we have professional development. So considering we have the same revenue total of $89,500, how would we adjust our budget to make sure that we spend $10,000 on professional development? And so we've reworked the categories here again to make sure that we put an emphasis in professional development at the request of one of the funders. And so we've made professional development $10,000 right off the bat. That's a number that we know that we have to get to. So let's put that in the budget. And then we went backward from there. And so again, taking the budget out of places where we know we can reduce it slightly without compromising the overall effectiveness of the budget, or the project, I should say. Next slide, please. In column C, basically here we are going to create a final report budget. So we've done all the work, and now we're preparing to let our funder know exactly how we spent the dollars. And in this scenario, we've been given a little bit more money. So our total is more than $100,000, as you'll see here. So it's 107. And so we filled it in, and this is what the actual cost would look like. But let's look at the next slide in column D. Like we said, we have an extra $25,000 now. How would we go around spending that? So can you go to the next slide, please? So if we've been given an extra $25,000, how would you go around spending that? You could go through and just beef up all the line items as you see we did here. We made the staffing a little bit more because we know that we can probably do a little bit more. So we'll need more hours for our staff to work. We can really boost up the supplies. Travel, we can leave at the same funding level as before because we wanted to make sure that that's available. We can increase our professional development so that our staff and our program people know exactly what they need to be able to do this project, to carry it out, the education that they need. And so we've raised the budget pieces quite a bit. But another thing too is you've got more funding and maybe you don't need to spend it all. So you've created a situation where there's been an underspend. One of the things that you could do is maybe ask your funder to let you, like I said before, if you have this great relationship with your funder and you've got some extra dollars, maybe you can extend the program and maybe carry it out a couple months longer to utilize the rest of the funding and make more impact. Or maybe you could use the remaining dollars to do a whole different project in which you'd have to rescope the dollars. And so you'd be submitting a new proposal with the funding that you have still on hand and letting them know how you might spend it. So those are a couple ways that you could take on some blended funding. You got some donations and the funders have added extra dollars to your project. And so that's how you might want to blend and braid it. Can you go to the next slide, please? So with that, that concludes our presentation today. I know we covered a lot of ground and we got into some very niche items for discussion on these various topics. And so what are the next steps from now? And so we want to let you know that at the group, we can't always be partners on projects, but we can always take an opportunity to look at your grants proposals to proof them and give you some feedback. So if that's something that you would like, our contact information, I think, will be going out as part of the PowerPoint. Would anyone like to share maybe with a one-word reflection in the chat, your thoughts on today's course? Or maybe what you might want